Welcome to the Low Tox Life podcast.
I'm an ex-water industry scientist who now works in academia, which means that I can publicly talk about things that previously would have got me sacked.
Welcome to the show. I'm Alex Stewart, your host. I'm so excited to have Associate Professor Ian Wright with me today. I wanted to bring a couple of guests on to talk about PFAS contamination. So today we get started and Ian gives us the lay of the land on groundwater, ocean water, tank water, fresh water, and what we know when it comes to PFAS and the levels of PFAS in those different types of water. A quick note from our wonderful show partners, and then we'll jump straight in. If you are lucky enough to live in Sydney and surrounds, Newcastle, Central Coast, Blue Mountains and Wollongong here in New South Wales, then Zestiny Farm, a lush oasis on the New South Wales Central Coast, is a podcast partner this month. From mid-Feb to the end of March, you have 50% off any of their fruit and veg mix subscription boxes. You can try the compact size, which is the smallest one, the classic, or the bounty, which is the one my family gets every week. 50% off that first box. You are not locked into any contracts or anything. You are just free to try and jump on this subscription. They're blending Mediterranean techniques with regenerative practices and modern innovation, and they're cultivating something really special. I have the great pleasure of having known the founders of this farm many years through previous businesses that they've had. That they have big goals. The bigger picture of what they're trying to achieve is truly inspiring. So I was absolutely stoked to take my weekly delivery to you guys. You will notice it's not all perfect looking produce. You will notice though, the flavour is big. Enjoy Zestiny Farm. I can't wait to hear what you think. Ian, how are you?
I'm well and great to be here, thanks.
Oh, I'm so excited for this because a lot of people are rightly terrified of PFAS, and you happen to know more than you'd probably care to about them through the work you've done over the years. So I guess I wanted to jump straight in and ask you what first personally clocked PFAS for you as a clear and present issue to the quality of water, to the safety of animals and humans.
It was, to be honest, it wasn't something I sought to study. It was a big jumbled acronym, PFAS, big long named chemical. It was a colleague who suggested we look at it. I study rivers and the health of rivers and the life in the river. Had a PhD student looking at platypus, and she got given, sadly, dead platypus that people had found in the community. These are actually incredibly valuable. We looked inside them. She did, dissected them, looked in the liver, and the PFAS chemical was huge. It was off the scale. That's when it hit me. And a lot of these waterways we were finding the platypus in, I would regard as pretty clean and important waterways. So that's when it became very real for me, and I read more and more literature and thought, ooh, these platypus are actually giving us a bit of a warning light in our food chain and particularly in our water supplies. So that's how I got into it, and it's gone off in different directions, and I can understand why people are confused and scared. And yeah, I am to some degree.
Absolutely. Short story, my gorgeous 16-year-old boy took to fishing this summer. And I said, just you do your research about if you want to do any river fishing, if the fish is safe to eat, if you do catch some. Otherwise, you can fish for sport and gently send them back. We were horrified. Basically, it's a big fat no in New South Wales. I couldn't believe it. So I think we need to start with the 101 here, Ian. Can you explain what PFAS are? We know they're called forever chemicals if you've read a few articles about them, but why you, in water science, working in drinking water systems, are really concerned?
It's a great question. It's a really confusing topic. I'm going to share a little bit about what I know. I don't think we fully understand the problem though. And we just got risk and uncertainty everywhere we look. They are man-made chemicals and starting particularly from about the 1940s, sort of post World War II, uh, chemicals that are in all kinds of things like, stain resistant in, additives to put on clothes, waterproof clothing, for example,
Yeah, I
Teflon.
remember when Seb started school at the local public school, and you go to the uniform shop, you get your uniforms that they tell you to get, and the t-shirts had the little Teflon brand tag on them. And I was like, oh, here we go.
Good,
They're everywhere.
really good point. And that Teflon brand, that was, it was in just about every house, and also in industry that manufacture food, takeaway food containers, paints, makeups, pharmaceuticals, you name it. I mean, I teach at university, and I start to see a panicking look in my students' eyes when I mention they're chemicals that can create oil resistance, heat resistance, moisture resistance, perfect for takeaway food containers, even coffee containers. And, you know, think of the, grease-proof um, pizza boxes. They're in that. So there are, every time I look up how many of the PFAS chemicals are, they've all got a unique molecular structure, and there's thousands of them, somewhere between 2,000 and 12,000, depending on who you ask. We don't even know exactly where they are throughout, the world and our lives. But they're made up of a carbon chain. It's a string of carbon atoms. Each tends to have a slightly different formulation made in a lab. Then we've got huge, chemical industry, but each carbon atom is bonded to a fluorine atom. I'm not a chemist, but I have been told this is one of the strongest bonds. Now, that's great when you're making a product and you want it to last a long time and resist, something like Teflon. It is actually brilliant. You can use a whole lot less fat in your cooking with a Teflon pan. So that's a great thing. But the trouble is it doesn't readily break down, and it bioaccumulates. And so I first saw it in those results from the platypus. Then I looked up and read it's in polar bears in the Arctic and beluga whales, and everywhere we look, it's in the wildlife and building up. And then it got a bit real and took a bit of a turn to the left. It's in us. It's in all of us. 99% of Australians that have given blood and had it tested, it's there.
I
And
love how the human ego tries to sort of avoid these realities that we are natural creatures and we are in a living environment just like any other animal. Like, of course it is
absolutely.
in us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good way to put it too, the human ego. And we neatly compartmentalize it. This is a great chemical, makes great products. But what about the downstream impacts when it turns into a waste product and
Mm,
when it can and does seep into the natural world and us? And we are actually part of the natural world. Like you say, it's an
yeah.
artificial distinction. It's a very powerful story of your son fishing. And frankly, your concerns are very real
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and 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 reasonable. I've personally, in my 40 years of doing science, I've never come across anything like this, Alex. And I've seen two, it's gone into the arts as well. Dark Waters talks
Yeah.
about the case of a dairy farmer, Wilbur
Such a
Kimmel.
harrowing film.
It is a harrowing film, and just as a warning, if you want an uplifting, happy ending, don't watch this.
You're not going to get it.
And,
No.
and there's an Australian version that's linked to it, How to Poison the Planet, with Australian case studies and American case studies. But, there's also industry and government regulators have deliberately held back, avoided, or looked the other way as this crisis of contamination. We know it's seeping, PFAS chemicals are seeping into us, they're seeping into the environment, water in particular, and things living in water. And the deliberate placing of profit above social responsibility, and then the regulators that should be making sure that this is done safely has been very poor. And in my opinion, it still is. And I've got scars to prove it. Um, it, it is a bit scary. I want to give some good news. But at the moment,
That's a good idea at this juncture. But I'm glad you mentioned that Australian documentary, because I think that was the culmination of Carrie Fellner's work as an investigative journalist for the Sydney Morning Herald. And I was following that story and was just so excited to see that funding had been obtained for that film, because often when you see American things as an Australian, you might think, oh, well, that's so far away. It can't be so bad. But to your point, Ian, we've got the profit over environment and health, but we've also got this addiction to convenience and ease that is so alluring. It's so intoxicating that we try to avoid investigative inquiry of our own because the payoff is so good in our daily life. And then, you add the pressure of working families and, you see us needing to be more efficient, get more done, do things more easily to get through days. I can see how we got here on a multitude of levels, which is why I'm excited you have good news now about how we're going and what we might be discovering.
oh yeah. Thanks. There's so much in that, in what you've just said, and we do. Everyone's got really busy, chaotic lives, and when you get to know someone, you think from a distance, wow, they've really got it sorted. No, they're dealing with chaos that you just can't see, and that convenience. I was out doing research yesterday and drove back late at night in the country. I ate service station food last night.
Yeah.
We were in a desperate rush to just get home before midnight. Not my greatest choice in food. Not a bad sandwich actually, but as ever, wrapped in plastic. You just can't get
Yeah.
away from it. And again, there's so many uncertainties there. But look, the good news is there are things that we can all individually do to, if we're aware, to limit our contact. And I suppose my number one, just based on my knowledge, and I'm an ex water industry scientist who now works in academia, which means that I can publicly talk about things that previously would have got me sacked. Water industry is very conservative. They're very good generally, but it also does depend on where you live. So my first thing would be, what's in your water supply? What's in your tap? Is your tap safe to drink? Look, I live in Sydney. I did work at Sydney Water. They also regularly test for PFAS now, after years of not testing. And I know that my system is safe. I'm secure about that. If anyone is in doubt, and I think it's a very reasonable question to ask, contact your water supply. If you're in regional Australia, that's often a council. If you're in one of the big cities, it might be Melbourne Water, South East Queensland Water, Water Corporation in Western Australia, Sydney Water, Tas Water. Contact them. They are required to test. We have pretty good, I would give them a silver medal for guidelines, for our Australian drinking water guidelines. But if you're in a small regional supplier, they might not test that often. And it took a bit of encouragement in New South Wales to get Department of Health to help the small country towns. But
Right.
number one, look at your water supply. I'm really concerned. My biggest concern here, what about the 1 million Australians who drink out of water tanks? And I do research on that. I'm sorry, but we don't know what's in your tank. We just don't know.
Right. So in those situations, if we are living off and drinking tank water, would that be a priority for us to think about really solid water filtration?
Yeah, absolutely. Tank water's been something that I've been studying for the last few years. Absolutely. And most tank water is untreated. You don't drink any water from a town water supply that hasn't been treated to some degree, but most tank water is not treated. So the most important thing you can do is filter it. And there's a huge array of water filtration devices on the market. It can be very expensive. They need maintenance, but you need to become your own water authority and treat it and maintain it. I think that's the most simple and basic thing you can do.
Yeah. And I think if you look at the research Carrie did here in Australia on the community that was devastated by PFAS water runoff and dark waters and all the research we've been doing around the world, the health cost down the track is enormous. So, I mean, if you think about a really good 5-7 stage carbon filter setup, and there are flexible options. Just don't get caught by pretty looking filters in Instagram ads if you don't know anything, because I've dug into most of those and found them for $50 on Alibaba, and they've slapped a pretty brand on it and it's only 2 or 3 stage. That is not going to cut it for PFAS. So you have to make sure it's filtering PFAS, and they've done independent testing. Ideally, that's the gold standard, and I'd be aiming for 7 stage for your daily drinking water. Reverse osmosis is great. Make sure it's remineralizing though. We don't want completely dead water either. And we want all those great minerals that we get from water. I think that's everything covered. I just don't, and usually that's only about $150 a year. So comparative to PFAS accumulation in the body, I'm prepared to do a little adjusting to make that work.
And I think you know your topic really well. That advice is really good. And you mentioned, for example, reverse osmosis. It's important to remineralize. Really good point. We cannot drink pure distilled water because it'll leach calcium out of our bones and teeth.
Yeah, that's it. And then we end up with another problem. So that's why you really want a good, reputable company doing constant independent testing, and not just selling you on removal as the message, but health.
Really, really well said. And it is hard for people because the advertising out there is often very emotive and glossy. So yeah, that's really good advice. But
thanks, Prof. Never get an A in that assignment. Love that.
yeah, no, you do very well with that. And I have sampled water tanks. I'm in the middle of a project right now. In fact, 2 projects now, and most people don't know anything about the water coming out of their tap, even if it's collected off the roof and runs into the tank. I know what goes in there, and it's one of those things. The more you know, the more scary it gets. Results are always a bit confronting, and down the bottom of tanks, there's a layer of sediment that builds up. That's okay. That's kind of a natural process, but that needs to be cleaned out.
Yeah.
All our water authorities around the country clean out their water reservoirs regularly, because a lot of those contaminants fall down, and it's there's a huge array. But there are other things that we can do with not having the Teflon type non-stick cookware. Good old cast iron stainless steel. There's a million things that are much, much more healthy to use.
Yeah. And if you don't like scrubbing pans and you miss that easy glide off situation, just soak it overnight. Set it, forget it. It'll wipe off in the morning just fine. And I think it's about getting back to that common sense approach rather than the sales pitches that have been ingrained in us for so long as a form of success and what it looks like. So yeah, I think there's some psychological kind of rewinds we can do to find it pretty easy to make those swaps.
It's other thing is, and you mentioned fish earlier, diet and food is another pathway for contamination. And I suppose one of the things that hit me, there was a couple. I gave evidence in the New South Wales and the Commonwealth Senate inquiry into PFAS, and I met a farmer who grew his own beef and sold it. And unfortunately, he found out he was very close to a PFAS contaminated area, and it was building up in his cattle. He had no idea about this. He was selling it, and the family was eating it. And then they had their blood tested, and it was off the scale. And that's one of the things you can do if you have major health concerns and you suspect that you've been contaminated with PFAS. It builds up in our liver and kidney and other organs of the body, but particularly those two. But you can get a blood test. It's simple, but it's expensive.
How
And
much is it? Do we
it's
know?
it's about $500. Well,
Jesus.
and you cannot get it off a health fund, and you will not get it off Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met, I study rivers and, invertebrates and platypus and things. I don't study people and, you know, their human health concerns. But I've started to meet people that have, disease in the family, and particularly parents that are concerned about this. Um, you know, I've helped document the contamination in the Blue Mountains, in
Yeah.
the upper Blue Mountains water supply. So anecdotally, I've now met a lot of people that have disease concerns in their family, and particularly parents with children have disease in their family, and they've gone and had their blood tested. At the moment, the government is refusing to subsidise that, or the water industry, Sydney Water. So you can do it, but it's very, very expensive. And about May last year, it was the Australian Bureau of Statistics, believe it or not, which is I find bizarre, but they released results on what are normal PFAS concentrations in humans in Australia. And prior to that, the medical industry didn't really know what was normal. You could get it tested, but it's like, so what? Is that good, bad?
Yeah. What do I do with that
Really bad. Yeah.
information? Yeah.
So we now know. Now it builds up in age groups. This
Mm-hmm.
is a bioaccumulative substance. The concentrations we're dealing with are so small, and I have heard government use the term insignificant, and it was a water supplier. These levels are negligible,
Mm-hmm.
insignificant.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks. I've got nothing to worry about then.
Oh, I found
Yeah.
that's exactly what I felt. It was
Oh,
really patronising and insulting. But the
mm,
concentrations, if I can paint this level, I've never dealt before with nanograms per litre. These are parts per trillion. I don't use those terms regularly. 1 part per trillion is, if you can imagine an eye drop and the single drop coming out an eye drop in about 10 or 20 Olympic swimming pools. That
mm-hmm.
is a nanogram per litre. And PFOS, which is a type of PFAS chemical, a particularly bad one that builds up in us, that is dangerous at about 10 parts per trillion. So that's like an eye drop in 1 or 2 Olympic swimming pools. And that does sound incredibly dilute as a chemical solution. Yet that's enough for it to build up in our liver if we're exposed and we're drinking that.
Yeah, gosh. And all you have to think about is, you know, there's the PTFE that's been brought in since the PFOA which was Teflon, was banned. It was 2017 in frying pans. But they bring in this cousin PFAS that just doesn't have enough research to be terrified of yet, behind it, just like the BPS after the BPA. It is happening everywhere in industry when things get banned. And you think of a young uni student who buys their cheap pan from the supermarket in their share house. They're not going to swap it out as soon as there's a scratch. They're
Absolutely.
going to try and make that thing last forever. So now you've got like actual particles flaking off into the food. It's pretty easy to see how we could achieve the kinds of levels you're talking about, Ian. OzClimate have been supporting your journey to the healthiest home possible for years. My favourite 2 types of appliances they have are the Winix air purifier range and the dehumidifier range, because of course moisture can happen to any home at any time. So we always want to make sure we're using climate gauges to assess whether we have too much humidity in our homes. And when it does go over that 60% mark and is staying over 60% persistently, either because it's raining or it's a humid season, All you need to do is know how to use dehumidifiers. This is something I have spent a lot of time educating on, and if you head to the @LowToxLife Instagram, you'll see there's a whole chunk of tiles on the feed with a white background. I did a 10-part series to step you through all the reasons that you need a dehumidifier and how to actually use it, what size you might need, what kind of situation you might need based on different types of floor plans. So I'm starting there because here in Australia, it is a more humid time of the year. So thrilled to have Oz Climate supporting our low tox community, the Australians only, for the whole year of 2026. Use the Low Tox Life code at checkout, 10% off your order, even often if things are on sale. Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really hard to know where it's come from in people, but what it really is critical. And we know that particularly from the United States, where there has been that's really been where we first learnt about these dangers. And in America, a lot of their water supplies are actually groundwater. And that's the most dangerous part, because once these PFAS chemicals get down into the groundwater, that is a problem we are just not going to solve.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate, trying to unscramble an egg. But people in those areas are associated with a whole series of adverse health conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunately, it's probably not the people who are able to nitpick their health and go have the $500 test. It's the people who are at the behest of agricultural regional communities, often poor farm workers who don't get to decide whether the agricultural chemicals contain PFAS or not, or whether the river has PFAS or not. And they're the big health stats. It just feels like we're leaving the people who do the backbreaking work across the world to keep our food supplies humming are the ones who get the most, bear the brunt of the poor health stats.
Absolutely. And when you say that, I immediately go to the firefighters. So
Oh gosh, firefighters as well, public service.
PFOS, they use PFOS as a foaming agent. It's like an ultimate bubble bath. It makes incredible foam. And so for firefighters particularly when they go to a fuel fire, so they trained, often got covered in meters of this foam, and they use it for things like, vehicle accidents. And I'm in the middle of publishing a couple of studies now showing that one single truck accident, which caused the PFAS contamination up in the Blue Mountains, that happened 33 years ago, Alex. And the contamination now still in the waterway seeping out of that is still extreme today.
Wow.
And I found a second one, thanks to a platypus. The second most contaminated platypus we found was in the Central Coast, out at a little creek called Arimba Creek. It's nearly exactly halfway between Sydney and Newcastle. And where did this come from? Another truck crash. I looked through the media records, found 8th of December 2000, it was a tragic petrol tanker crash. The car driver was killed, so was the truck driver. And ABC reported it last week, and they actually dug up the file footage. And the most confronting thing for me, and there's about 20 confronting things, is seeing the firefighters holding a hose of water, and they've got a little pipe coming off it, and a second firefighter feeding chemical into that. That's PFAS. And that from that one single accident, 25 years later, we're still measuring it in the environment. And it's attachment.
Wow. Are you measuring the firefighters and their health conditions as well?
No, that's out of my league. There's been wonderful work done in Victoria in particular, and I think his assistant commissioner, Mick Tisbury, is like a hero of occupational exposure to PFAS, and he worked out that, frankly, he was going to a lot of funerals of people dying, fit people dying quite young, and worked out what's going on here. He did his research as, I think, an unmedically trained firefighter and worked out what we've been using, tracked particularly back to their training facility in Victoria, regional Victoria. And yeah, there's certain occupations that have really, really borne the brunt of this, and they have had to battle to get that recognised. And simple things like getting their PFAS tested, which I think gradually we're doing more and more. But in the States, it's often the companies that make these chemicals, like DuPont and
3M.
Exactly, and 3M, absolutely.
Gosh, I mean, it makes me think of the incredible activism Jon Stewart, the comedian over in the States, has been doing for the 9/11 firefighters since that happened and since they all started getting these horrific cancers. Very young, very fit, and all traceable back to that massive event.
It's truly awful, isn't it? And a lot of these things take decades to develop.
That's the thing. And then we have the problem that you've then got to fix.
Yeah, and and from my point of view, and I don't have an axe to grind here. My research on this is mostly self-funded. You don't get big funding to study pollution on these sort of things. But just I'd have to say, Australian governments, perhaps it's because we had so many contamination incidents at military bases and firefighting, it's become seen as a huge cost to recognise it, then address the cause, repair it, take measures to help out the local community that have been affected. And I don't think we do that well at all.
No, and I think part of that, we have to call it what it is we've allowed major industrial corporations to get involved in election donations, just like in America. We've seen that be the disaster that it's become. And then you have the situation where, how am I going to get my funding for my campaign if I'm not, on good terms with that company and that company? And that, again, has a true cost, which is environment and health, again, and quality of life. It's devastating, but we've ended up here. So I feel like unless we start actually calling out root cause reasons that we're bad at it, then it's just going to keep going on, where we don't ask permission, we don't test, we roll out on the promise of, pioneering and excellence and first to market, and this is going to help us all. And then we wait to say quietly, sorry, where some boss gets to quietly resign. And, and we just see it too much now. And people wonder why we don't trust authorities as much as we used to, because we don't necessarily believe they're working in the best interests of the people.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I'll just point out in Sydney Water, I worked at Sydney Water for nearly 20 years, and they resisted testing their water for PFAS, testing their drinking water. It was like they were holding back the tide. And people like that wonderful journalist you mentioned before, Carrie Fellner, knew this was a problem. I started to get questions in the media. Should we be testing our water? And yes, you can't act in terms of management or engineering of water supplies until you have the data. And so they eventually tested in 2024, and then it quietly came out. They never ever said sorry. It quietly came out that the Blue Mountains water supply was heavily contaminated with PFAS. And there still hasn't been an apology. And yeah, it's remarkable. Look, you're right. And I know that industry really well, and they are conservative. They do a really good job. They work on very low margins. But yeah, almost metaphorically putting their head in the sand. Yeah, it's incredible. But the beautiful thing is, you know what? When it was found, they swung into action. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. They switch supplies. They treat the water supply up at Katoomba now with the sort of filtration that you're talking about that
Mm.
homeowners can have on a scale level, and bang, 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 bang. I watch the data, the PFASs come down, and yeah, I without hesitation drink the water. But that action didn't happen until they actually started testing, which is 101 and about 15 years too late.
Yeah. So that is probably a really exciting potential for community advocacy work and getting together and all deciding in a bit of a coordinated way. You know, we have these incredible Facebook groups. Say on this day, we're all going to send a letter, and, you know, someone who's good with words gets the scripting right, and we're going to ask our local water tester, water body, water regulatory body. What do we call it?
Um, uh, yeah, good question. I would call it a water utility.
Uh-huh.
So it could be a local town. It's often a local council. Sometimes it's a commercial company, Melbourne Water. But yeah, your local drinking water supplier, town water
Mhm.
supplier, if you like.
And we're going to ask them, A, whether they test for PFAS in that supply, and B, what is the documentation for the most recent results?
Uh, great, great point. Great point.
Okay.
And yeah, and in some cases, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. And in terms of mental health, it just gives you security. Oh, actually, it's no
Mm.
problem. That's a really good thing to know.
Yeah,
If you set
exactly. Instead
anxiety,
of the wondering and worry that internet content creation kind of puts us, oh my God, everything's trying to kill us. And look, to be fair, a lot of our chat so far has hardly been positive. But at the same time, like, there is, if you start taking some action and finding out, then sometimes you find out things are okay, as you've said, and that's great. And if they're not, then you still have agency to sort out a personal water filter for your drinking every day.
and to be honest, we're traveling more and more
Mm,
as a society, and I actually think it's a great it's an act of trust when you fill up a glass of water and drink it from the tap.
yeah.
And most of my life, I've done that without any hesitation. I worked in agriculture, so I lived on a lot of farms. And, you know, as an 18-year-old, I worked on a farm after school and I just about spat it on the ground. It was untreated water from the local groundwater supply. And I don't know that I got sick from that. Unfortunately, I started drinking a bit of beer as an alternative. But
Hopefully not made locally with that water.
yeah, I hope, no, it wasn't, but I don't, I don't, no great answer to any problem to do that. But traveling overseas, what we take for granted is not necessarily the standard that applies in other countries as well. And
Yeah.
it's just a good practice to know where did your water come from and what how can you be secure that it's safe, clean, and healthy. And if you're traveling in a lot of areas, have a look for travel alerts and
Mm,
just don't drink from the tap. I have paid
yeah.
the price for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have great travel water filters as options as well. But what you said there, it kind of puts it on us. Again, it's another thing to do on us as the consumer instead of actually improving systems and making the water just not something anyone has to worry about. Like, wouldn't that be nice? Right? Oh my gosh. And now this year, we've seen the tragic rollback in the US, for example, of this past year, rather, where they had gone all in on the strictest possible measures. I think it was April 2024 to test, monitor, filter, clean, like really, really incredible. I think, you know, New York State was one of the biggest projects that was lined up. And we now have this situation where all of that regulation is being rolled back. And again, big industry wins on avoiding those costs. Does Australia kind of piggyback historically on what happens in the US?
uh, yes, to a degree,
Mm,
absolutely. And you're right. It was they were the world leaders, the US EPA. It helped that they sued the companies that were involved in this, 3M and DuPont, and they sued and got a lot of money. And the US EPA, to me, were the world leaders. And the US often is in lots of ways. So in Australia, we came under enormous pressure to revise our drinking water guidelines. and quantify how much of the PFAS chemicals we should have, there was quite a bit of resistance in Australia from the water industry and the medical professions that advise. So we changed our water guidelines, and then they, reduced in some ways by like 100 times the safe level, because we're learning all the time, because it can take so long for disease or illness to develop. And yes, it did trigger right around the world. Everyone revised their water quality standards, or many did, but we haven't to the same degree. And there is definitely a bit of an industry pushback that those numbers are really hard to reach. I'm looking at the guidelines at the moment for the PFAS chemicals. So for the PFOS, one of the most common and dangerous ones, the standard is now 8 nanograms a litre. In the States, it was 4. So I even just find that interesting. Are Australians tougher and able to withstand more PFAS, or Americans more?
Or did someone just say in true Australian fashion, yeah, nah. Let's just make it 8. We can't do 4.
I can kind of see this graph. How much will it cost us to do that?
Nah.
But yeah, America are losing that position in so many ways, sadly. As world leaders, the World Health Organization has a huge role here as well. And that was often very strongly associated with the US EPA. That is definitely changing at the moment.
Yeah.
But Australia is still a bit of an outlier, and the medical advice on PFAS still highlights the uncertainty that there's uncertain human health impacts. And Australia is kind of the outlier. We seem reluctant to link high PFAS in our bodies with the likelihood of adverse health outcomes. And there's a big list. I've got a few in front here. They go on and on and on. Increased cancer risk, higher cholesterol, reduced birth rate, lower fertility, changes to your immune system, reduced kidney function, high risk of cholesterol and obesity. There's a long list, but you know enough about medical research and the findings. There is a lot of uncertainty because it will depend on the individual and so many factors.
Yeah. So like high incidence of takeaways, high exposure to PFAS lined containers is also high exposure to high fats and salts in foods beyond what is reasonable. And then you can see how it's like the meat studies, meat cancer. Well, is it hamburgers or is it, pasture raised? Can we separate out those groups? It's much harder when you've got lots of possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. But risk and uncertainty is such an important part of this. And for me, cooking with whole foods is a really big thing. Knowing where your food comes from, fruit and vegetables, avoiding as much as possible highly processed food. And this one hurts me to say it. I don't like saying this one. Seafood is a known risk. And shellfish in particular. It's out there. The PFAS is out there. It bioaccumulates. A lot of it ends up just from gravity in the ocean. And unfortunately, it's building up in our food supplies in different ways.
Have you done seawater versus freshwater, like in the same region, as a comparative study, Ian?
No, I haven't. No, it's a ripper idea.
Put it on your list. I'm sure it's a long list, but that's like a little request from me, because that'll help us kind of go, oh, actually, so sea might not be as bad, but it's still a known risk if seafood's your number one protein.
Look, it's a really good suggestion. And the PFAS itself is kind of fascinating. It doesn't like water, and it tends to bind with charged particles. Things like clays, organic matter, protein in us and animals. So it's often in a river, for example, it's often down in the sediment. It's like 20 times higher the content in a river down in the sediment and just sort of circulates around in the water column above that. I was standing in a rural river looking at where um, where we know there's PFAS in the fish. Um, and the EPA have actually issued a warning. Um, it's weird stuff. So it's at incredibly low concentrations. I said that earlier, but it aggregates and then it builds up in sediment and in biota, like the livers of platypus, at enormous concentrations. So it's got this really strange behaviour that sort of almost disappears to nothingness. It's so dilute, but it can still be so dangerous. And our our food industry, our farmers are so concerned about this. And one of their big concerns is if they know it's there, what do you think it does to the value of their products and the value of their enterprise? There is, in some ways, a bit like aspects of the water industry. I can understand why they wouldn't even test for it. I can understand that.
Don't want to open Pandora's box and a whole bunch of new worries that you've got to think about. Mm.
Exactly. But I think we need more testing of food. I think that's a real must, again, to help inform us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when you know, I can't remember the name of it. And in fact, the US has just freshly approved another one. But some chemical inputs used in industrial agriculture or broadacre farming contain PFAS. So we're literally spraying it on fields where cattle are grazing, sheep are grazing, or
Yes.
produce is being grown. And that
Yes.
just blows my mind
I know.
that anything like that would be allowed in this day and age.
It's insane. And you're absolutely right. And again, from the water industry, when sewage, our wastewater, is treated, and that's a lot of wastewater. It's about 250 litres per person per day. But the solid part of that has been pulled out, retermed biosolids, and literally that is spread on properties.
Mm.
And the unfortunate bit is that is known to contain PFAS.
Yeah.
We don't even have any picture of what impact that is happening at the moment. And the farmers where that's happened are just terrified and paralysed, and they want to provide clean food. But I think it's reasonable to assume that they were unwittingly doing something they thought was good in all ways, good and safe.
Yeah, it's very rarely the farmer's fault.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
They're our best people.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
whether they've been indoctrinated to believe something's safe when it turns out it might not be, or whether they're doing things in new and transparent ways intentionally, either way, they're good people trying to work very hard to feed us. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, no judgment there, but a reality that these chemicals are proving to be harmful in more ways than one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Ian, let's finish. Is it possible for us to do as Dark Waters didn't and finish on a positive?
I think it's positive. I think it's positive that we are now generally testing something that we didn't test 10 years ago.
Great.
And for a large part, probably for the largest part of Australia, it's like, oh, great, that's not in our water supply. That's fantastic. So I think I think that's really good. We've got tougher guidelines. I think, National Health and Medical Research Council, they set the Australian drinking water guidelines. They're a lot tougher. So I think we do have an extra layer of protection there. And again, if you need, and I encourage you to find out what's in your water supply, contact your water supplier, and I reckon they will very proudly tell you, no, we test for it, and majority don't even find it. And if we do, we've, like the Blue Mountains, they now treat that. They took action. We've got fantastic engineers here. They jumped into it, spent some resources, and it's a whole lot cleaner. But I think there's a lot of things you can do individually to not use particularly old scratch Teflon pans. I like takeaway quite often, but our containers are safer now. But home cooking with whole ingredients is better in general and safer to me. And if you've got if you've got major health concerns and you're concerned that this can be a problem, you can actually get your blood tested. Unfortunately, it costs though. We are managing this better. And I think compared to 15 years ago, this was like wildfire spread around, but we didn't even know where it was, let alone how bad or what to do about it.
Yeah, thank you, because it's so nice to know that we're in a better place now than we were. And now it's
Absolutely.
about our own personal agency. And I'm going to pop in the show notes, guys. I've done probably about 3 different articles over the years on everyday items, things like irons that are PFAS coated,
Yeah.
or raincoats and different options. So you'll have those resources in the show notes, and I'll link to some of your research that you've done, Ian. And we look forward to that sea versus river in same region testing down the track, because I reckon that'd be a really interesting comparison.
I like that idea. Well, thanks, Alex. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and to contribute. And you're probably the most knowledgeable interviewer I think I've had on a topic like this. So, very, very well done. I think we could have turned the table here.
No. You need the people working at the coalface with the consumer advocacy people, and then we all do a great job together. So we
Exactly. Well
really
said.
appreciate your work. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us in listening to this week's show. If you're not already subscribed or following the show on whatever platform you listened, please do that now. It helps enormously in terms of getting this show out to more people. Another way you can connect and support the work we do so that we can support you in your low tox life is join us in the Low Tox Club. You'll get access to amazing member masterclasses where we invite some of our best show guests for a live Q&A with members. You also have great shopping discounts from low tox businesses, and honestly, the nicest low tox community Facebook group that exists on the internet. I do hope you join us there. It costs just the price of a coffee a month on average. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the Explore tab, and Low Tox Club is the first option there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.